The morning Corinne Hendricks led 3 sheriff deputies onto my property. She wore that same smug smile she had perfected over months of harassment. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed directly at my pond, where 2 magnificent horses were cooling off in the crystal-clear water. "There they are, officers," she declared with theatrical authority. "Illegal commercial horse operations on residential property, federal violations. I have documented everything." The deputies looked uncomfortable, but they followed her across my land like she owned the place. I stood on my porch, watching this woman who had made my life hell for 6 months finally play her trump card. What Corinne did not know was that those horses belonged to the United States Border Patrol. What she did not know was that Agent Rodriguez was about to arrive for his scheduled training session. What she did not know was that her obsession with destroying me was about to destroy her instead. That morning, everything changed. I had dreamed of owning ranch property for 15 years. Every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, every dollar saved brought me closer to that goal. When I finally found those 15 acres of rolling hills with a natural spring-fed pond, I knew I was home. The property sat just outside the city limits, surrounded by open fields and scattered rural homes. The previous owner had built horse facilities that I planned to restore someday. For now, I was content just walking my land at sunrise, breathing air that smelled like freedom instead of exhaust fumes. The pond was the crown jewel of my ranch. Fed by an underground spring, it stayed cool and clear year-round. Massive oak trees provided shade along the banks. Wild deer came to drink at dawn. This was everything I had worked for. 3 weeks after I moved in, a thick manila envelope appeared in my mailbox. The return address read Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I stared at it, confused. My property was not part of any subdivision. I lived on a rural road with no sidewalks, street lights, or neighborhood amenities. Inside were 47 pages of rules, regulations, and architectural guidelines. Pool restrictions, fence height limitations, approved paint colors, landscaping requirements. The letter welcomed me to the community and reminded me that compliance was mandatory for all residents within the association boundaries. I called the number listed and spoke to a secretary, who confirmed that my property fell within their jurisdiction due to some boundary expansion from years ago. She suggested I attend the next board meeting if I had questions. That is when I met Corinne Hendricks. She arrived at my property the following Saturday morning in a pristine white SUV. Corinne stepped out wearing designer jeans, expensive boots, and a smile that never reached her eyes. Everything about her screamed suburban perfection. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I am Corinne Hendricks, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA board. I wanted to introduce myself personally." Corinne was probably 50 years old but fought against every sign of aging with the dedication of a full-time job. Her blonde hair was professionally styled, her makeup flawless despite the rural setting. She looked completely out of place on my dusty ranch. "Beautiful property," she continued, her eyes scanning my land like a general surveying a battlefield. "I can see you have some work ahead of you to bring everything up to community standards." I explained that I was new to the area and still learning about HOA requirements. Corinne nodded sympathetically, but her smile grew sharper. "The pond is lovely," she said, walking toward the water without invitation. "Of course, we will need to discuss appropriate usage policies. Water features can attract unwanted activities if not properly managed." I followed her, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. This woman was treating my private property like she had authority over every blade of grass. "I notice you have horse facilities," Karen observed, pointing at the old barn and fencing. "I hope you understand that commercial boarding operations are strictly prohibited in residential areas. We maintain very high standards here." I assured her I had no plans for boarding horses or running any business. Karen nodded, but her expression suggested she did not believe me. "Good," she said, pulling out her phone to take photos of my pond and barn. "I document everything for our records. Community compliance is my top priority." After Karen left, I sat on my porch feeling like a storm cloud had just passed over my peaceful ranch. I had moved here to escape exactly this kind of petty authority and neighborhood politics. Now it seemed to have followed me. That night, I researched HOA laws and discovered that my property had indeed been included in their boundaries through a legal expansion several years before I purchased it. The previous owner apparently never dealt with the HOA because they lived out of state and rarely visited the property. I was stuck with Corinne Hendricks and her rules whether I liked it or not. 3 months into ranch ownership, I was working on fence repairs when a government vehicle pulled into my driveway. A Hispanic man in Border Patrol uniform stepped out, his bearing professional but friendly. "Good morning," he said, approaching with his hands visible and relaxed. "I am Agent Carlos Rodriguez with United States Border Patrol. I was hoping to speak with the property owner about a partnership opportunity." Agent Rodriguez explained that my ranch sat along a crucial patrol route near the international border. His unit had been using a small pond on adjacent government land for horse training, but recent drought had made it unusable. "We noticed your pond from aerial surveillance," he said respectfully. "It would be perfect for cooling and training our patrol horses during extended shifts. We would only use it during scheduled times with your permission." The agent was clearly a professional who took his duty seriously. He explained how Border Patrol horses required regular water training to maintain conditioning in the desert heat. The work was dangerous and demanding, requiring both horse and rider to stay in peak physical condition. "We would deeply appreciate your cooperation," Agent Rodriguez continued. "This would be a significant help to our mission, and we would ensure minimal impact on your property." I did not hesitate. Supporting law enforcement, especially those protecting our borders, felt like an honor and a duty. We shook hands on an arrangement that would allow scheduled training sessions and emergency access when needed. "Thank you," Agent Rodriguez said with genuine gratitude. "Citizens like you make our job possible. We will treat your property with complete respect." The first training session happened the following Tuesday morning. I watched from my porch as Agent Rodriguez and his partner arrived with 2 magnificent horses in a specialized trailer. These were not ordinary riding horses, but highly trained animals bred for desert patrol work. The horses were beautiful, powerful creatures with intelligent eyes and calm demeanor, despite their obvious strength. Their riders were equally impressive, professional law enforcement officers who clearly loved and respected their animal partners. I watched the horses enter my pond with natural grace, swimming strongly while their riders maintained constant vigilance. Even during training, these agents were alert and ready, scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. Agent Rodriguez introduced me to several other patrol officers over the following weeks. All were courteous, professional, and genuinely appreciative of my cooperation. They treated my property better than some of my own family had. The arrangement benefited everyone. The Border Patrol got a crucial training location, I got the satisfaction of supporting law enforcement, and my pond got regular use that kept it healthy and clean. That is when Karen Hendricks reappeared. I first noticed her white SUV parked at the edge of my property line during a training session. She sat inside for nearly an hour, watching through what appeared to be binoculars or a camera with telephoto lens. The next day, Corinne called my phone. "I observed some concerning activity on your property yesterday," she said without any greeting or pleasantries. "There were horses and riders using your pond. This appears to be exactly the kind of commercial boarding operation we discussed." I explained the Border Patrol arrangement, emphasizing that this was not a business but a service to law enforcement. Karen listened in silence, then spoke with cold authority. "I will need documentation proving this claim," she said. "Until then, I am treating this as a violation of HOA regulations regarding commercial activities on residential property." Agent Rodriguez happened to arrive for a scheduled session while Karen was still on the phone. I waved to him from my porch, and he waved back with his usual friendly professionalism. "Who is that person?" Karen demanded. "Are you conducting business while speaking to me?" I explained that Agent Rodriguez was arriving for horse training, but Karen had already hung up. Through my window, I could see her SUV still parked at my property line, camera or binoculars trained on my pond. That evening, Agent Rodriguez stopped by my house after the training session. "I noticed someone observing us today," he said carefully. "Is there any problem with our arrangement?" I explained about Karen and the HOA situation. Agent Rodriguez frowned with concern. "We appreciate your support more than you know," he said. "If anyone gives you trouble about helping law enforcement, please let me know immediately. We protect our community partners." I assured him that Karen was just a busybody neighbor and that our arrangement would continue as planned. But watching her SUV drive away that evening, I felt the first stirrings of real unease. Karen Hendricks was planning something, and I was about to discover just how far she was willing to go. Karen struck first with a certified letter that arrived exactly 1 week after she observed the Border Patrol training session. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and marked "Urgent Compliance Required." Inside were 8 pages of formal complaints, violations, and demands for immediate cessation of what Karen called unauthorized commercial horse boarding and training operations on residential property. The letter accused me of running an illegal business, violating water usage restrictions, creating noise disturbances, and allowing unvetted individuals onto community property. Karen demanded that I cease all horse-related activities within 14 days or face escalating fines and legal action. I called the HOA office, but the secretary could only tell me that Board President Hendricks had filed a formal complaint and that I should respond in writing within the specified timeframe. I wrote a detailed response explaining the Border Patrol arrangement, including Agent Rodriguez's contact information for verification. I emphasized that this was not a business, but a service to federal law enforcement protecting our border. Karen rejected my explanation entirely. Her second letter arrived 3 days later, even thicker than the first. This time she accused me of lying about the Border Patrol connection and demanded proof of federal authorization for commercial horse operations on residential land. "Claiming government involvement does not exempt you from HOA regulations," Karen wrote. "All commercial activities require proper permits and compliance with community standards regardless of supposed federal connections." The tone was insulting and dismissive, as if supporting law enforcement was somehow suspicious rather than patriotic. Karen then began her door-to-door campaign. I learned about this from my neighbor Tom, an elderly retired veteran who lived a quarter-mile down the road. Tom stopped by one evening looking troubled. "That HOA woman was at my house today," he said. "She was asking questions about you and showing photos of some kind of federal activity on your property. She seemed real worked up about it." According to Tom, Karen was telling neighbors that I was involved in dangerous government operations that could threaten community safety. She claimed federal agents were conducting surveillance and training exercises that violated neighborhood peace and security. "She made it sound like you were harboring criminals or something," Tom said with disgust. "I told her she was crazy, but she had all these photos and documents, real professional-looking stuff." I felt sick. Karen was turning my patriotic support of border security into something sinister and threatening. The harassment escalated when I noticed new security cameras. Karen had installed high-end surveillance equipment on poles at the very edge of her property line, all pointed directly at my pond area. The cameras were clearly expensive, professional-grade units with telephoto lenses and motion detection. I researched the legal boundaries and discovered the cameras were technically on her property, making them legal despite their obvious intrusive purpose. Karen was documenting every Border Patrol visit, every training session, every moment of activity on my land. She also created a Facebook group called Willowbrook Estates Community Safety Alert. A neighbor showed me screenshots of Karen's posts. She had shared dozens of photos of Agent Rodriguez and his team, calling them unidentified federal operatives conducting suspicious activities in our peaceful neighborhood. Karen wrote long posts about militarization of residential areas and dangerous precedents that threaten our property values and family security. She tagged local news stations and politicians, trying to generate outrage about federal law enforcement using private property. The comments were mostly supportive of Karen, with neighbors expressing concern about government overreach and property rights violations. Very few people seemed to understand that this was about Border Patrol training, not some sinister federal operation. I tried reasoning with Karen directly. I called her and calmly explained that Agent Rodriguez and his team were protecting our border, doing dangerous work that required ongoing training. I emphasized that they were respectful, professional, and grateful for community support. "You can call Agent Rodriguez yourself," I offered. "He would be happy to explain the program and answer any questions." Karen laughed coldly. "I am not interested in your explanations or your supposed federal contacts," she said. "You are in violation of community regulations, and I intend to enforce compliance through every legal means available." 2 weeks later, Karen delivered her masterpiece. The HOA board meeting was held in the community center of the actual Willowbrook Estates subdivision, 20 minutes from my ranch. I had never attended before, but Karen made it clear that my presence was required. The meeting room was packed with residents I had never seen, all staring at me like I was some kind of criminal. Karen stood at the front with a presentation board covered in photographs, documents, and official-looking charts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began with theatrical authority, "we are here tonight to address a serious violation of our community standards and a potential threat to our neighborhood security." For 30 minutes, Karen presented her case against me like a prosecutor arguing for conviction. She displayed enlarged photos of Border Patrol agents, horses in my pond, and government vehicles on my property. She read from regulations, cited legal precedents, and painted me as someone who had brought federal law enforcement into their peaceful community without consent or consideration. This individual has unilaterally decided that our residential neighborhood should serve as a training ground for federal operations, Karen declared. He has invited armed agents, government surveillance, and potentially dangerous activities into our midst without any community input or oversight. When I tried to speak, Karen cut me off. "The time for explanations is over," she said firmly. "We have documented clear violations of our community regulations. The board will vote on enforcement measures tonight." I sat in stunned silence as my neighbors voted to give Karen full authority to pursue legal action against me for violating HOA rules regarding commercial activities and unauthorized use of community resources. Walking to my truck after the meeting, I felt completely alone. Karen had turned my entire community against me by twisting my support of law enforcement into something threatening and wrong. That night, I could not sleep. Through my bedroom window, I could see the red lights of Karen's surveillance cameras pointing directly at my pond. The war had officially begun. Karen's ultimatum arrived on a Monday morning, delivered by a process server who apologized for disturbing me so early. The envelope was legal-sized, official, and marked with the law firm letterhead that Karen had apparently hired. Inside was the most comprehensive legal threat I had ever seen. 37 pages of violations, demands, legal precedents, and threats of financial ruin. Karen accused me of operating an illegal commercial horse boarding facility, violating water usage restrictions, creating noise disturbances, allowing unauthorized access to community property, and conducting business activities in residential zones. The document demanded complete cessation of all horse-related activities within 30 days. It threatened daily fines of $500 for continued violations, legal action to force compliance, and potential foreclosure proceedings to recover HOA costs and penalties. At the bottom, in bold letters, was the most chilling threat of all. Failure to comply will result in legal action to force sale of property to recover accumulated fines and legal costs. Karen was trying to take my ranch. I drove immediately to the office of Robert Chen, a property attorney I found through online reviews. Chen was a serious man in his 40s who specialized in HOA disputes and property rights issues. "This is extensive," Chen said after reviewing Karen's ultimatum. "She has clearly invested significant time and money in building this case against you." Chen explained that HOA laws in our state gave associations broad authority to enforce community regulations, including the power to place liens on properties and force sales to recover unpaid fines. "The problem is jurisdiction," Chen continued. "Your property was legally included in their boundaries through an expansion process several years ago. That gives them authority even though you live outside the actual subdivision." I asked about the Border Patrol Partnership and whether federal law enforcement activities were protected from HOA interference. "That is complicated," Chen admitted. "Federal operations can supersede local regulations in some cases, but HOAs have successfully argued that property use restrictions apply regardless of the user's identity." Chen's fee estimate for fighting Karen's legal action was devastating. "Even if we won, the cost would be more than I could afford. If we lost, I would face both legal fees and Karen's accumulated fines and penalties." "I hate to say this," Chen said gently, but you might want to consider compliance rather than litigation. Sometimes the cost of being right is too high to pay." That afternoon, I had the most difficult conversation of my adult life. Agent Rodriguez arrived for a scheduled training session, but I met him at the gate instead of waving him toward the pond. His expression grew serious as I explained Corinne's ultimatum and the legal threats. "I am so sorry," I said, feeling like I was betraying everything I believed in. "I cannot afford to lose my property fighting this. I think we need to end our arrangement." Agent Rodriguez listened without interruption, his professional composure never wavering, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "I understand," he said finally. "You have been more generous than we had any right to expect. We will find another training location." He paused, looking toward my pond where his horses had trained for months. "This is unfortunate," Agent Rodriguez continued. "This location was perfect for our needs, and losing it will impact our operational readiness. But I would never ask you to risk your home for our training requirements." We shook hands, and I watched Agent Rodriguez drive away for what I thought would be the last time. I felt like a coward and a traitor to everything I claimed to believe about supporting law enforcement. That evening, Corinne celebrated. My neighbor Tom called to tell me that Corinne was at the local coffee shop, holding court with several other women and bragging about her victory over me. "She was real loud about it," Tom said with disgust, "talking about how she showed you that HOA rules apply to everyone, no matter who they think they are. She said she made you back down from your federal connections and proved they were not as powerful as you pretended." Tom was a veteran who understood the value of supporting law enforcement. He was clearly disgusted by Corinne's celebration over ending a Border Patrol training partnership. "That woman does not care about community safety," Tom said angrily. "She just likes having power over people. What she did to you was wrong." I thanked Tom for the support, but his words could not ease the shame I felt about surrendering to Corinne's threats. That night, I sat on my porch looking at my empty pond. No Border Patrol horses would cool off in those clear waters. No dedicated agents would train for the dangerous work of protecting our border. Because of Corinne's vindictive obsession with control, law enforcement had lost a valuable resource. I thought about packing up and selling the ranch. Corinne had made it clear that my life here would be one endless battle over petty regulations and community politics. Maybe it was time to find somewhere else to build my dream. But as I sat in the darkness, watching Corinne's red surveillance cameras monitoring my property, something changed inside me. I had worked 15 years to buy this ranch. I had done nothing wrong except support law enforcement officers who risked their lives protecting our country. I had been respectful, cooperative, and reasonable throughout Corinne's campaign of harassment. Maybe it was time to stop being reasonable. Maybe it was time to let Corinne discover that some battles cost more than she was prepared to pay. The next morning, I called Agent Rodriguez. The morning Corinne Hendricks made her biggest mistake. She arrived at my property with 3 sheriff deputies and the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. It was barely sunrise when I heard vehicles in my driveway. Through my bedroom window, I could see Corinne's white SUV followed by 2 patrol cars. She stepped out wearing a business suit like she was attending a board meeting rather than conducting what she clearly thought was a raid. I pulled on clothes and walked onto my porch as Corinne led the deputies across my property like she owned it. Her posture was triumphant, her movements theatrical. This was her moment of ultimate victory. "There is the pond in question," Corinne announced, pointing toward the water with dramatic authority. I have documented months of illegal commercial horse boarding operations conducted by this individual in violation of community regulations and federal law. The deputies looked uncomfortable. All three were middle-aged professionals who had probably dealt with HOA disputes before. They followed Karen, but without the enthusiasm she clearly expected. Deputy Martinez, the senior officer, approached my porch while Karen continued her presentation to the other two deputies. "Sir, we received a complaint about illegal business activities on your property," Deputy Martinez said respectfully. "Ma'am says you are running some kind of unlicensed horse boarding operation." I explained calmly that I was not running any business. The horses Deputy Martinez might have seen belonged to United States Border Patrol agents who used my pond for training with my full permission and support. "Border Patrol?" Deputy Martinez asked, his expression changing slightly. Karen overheard and rushed over, her voice rising with frustration. "He has been claiming federal connections for months," she said dismissively. "I have documented everything. Photos, videos, license plates, personnel descriptions. This is clearly a commercial horse boarding facility operating without proper permits." Karen pulled out a thick folder and began showing the deputies photographs of Agent Rodriguez and his team. She had dozens of images taken with telephoto lenses, showing Border Patrol vehicles, horses, and agents in training. "Look at this evidence," Karen declared. "Military-style vehicles, armed personnel, coordinated activities. This is obviously a business operation using federal employee impersonation to avoid regulations." Deputy Martinez studied the photos while his colleagues examined Karen's documentation. I could see them beginning to take her presentation more seriously, as the evidence appeared more substantial than a typical neighbor dispute. "These do look like federal agents," Deputy Martinez admitted. "But ma'am, if these are legitimate Border Patrol operations, we need to be very careful about interfering." Karen's voice became shrill with indignation. "Federal agents do not conduct training on private residential property," she snapped. "This individual is clearly lying about government connections to cover illegal business activities. I demand you arrest him for fraud, illegal business operations, and violation of federal impersonation laws." The deputies exchanged glances. Karen's authoritative presentation and extensive documentation were clearly influencing their assessment of the situation. "Sir, do you have any documentation proving these are legitimate federal operations?" Deputy Martinez asked me. I had Agent Rodriguez's business card and contact information, but Karen interrupted before I could respond. "Anyone can print fake business cards," she said dismissively. "I demand you take action immediately. I have video evidence of money changing hands, coordinated scheduling, and repeated use of private property for commercial purposes." That was when Agent Rodriguez arrived. His Border Patrol vehicle turned into my driveway right on schedule for our resumed training session. Agent Rodriguez stepped out in full uniform, his professional bearing immediately obvious to the deputies. Karen's confident expression began to falter as Agent Rodriguez approached our group. "Good morning," Agent Rodriguez said politely. "I hope I am not interrupting anything important." Deputy Martinez straightened slightly, recognizing another law enforcement professional. "Agent Rodriguez, United States Border Patrol," he introduced himself, showing his credentials. "I was arriving for our scheduled training session." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen stared at Agent Rodriguez like she was seeing a ghost. Her mouth opened and closed without sound as the reality of the situation crashed over her like a tsunami. Training session, Deputy Martinez asked carefully. Yes, sir, Agent Rodriguez replied professionally. We have an arrangement with the property owner to use his pond for horse conditioning and training. This gentleman has been extremely generous in supporting our mission. Karen finally found her voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. You are actually Border Patrol. Agent Rodriguez looked at Karen with polite confusion. Yes, ma'am, is there some problem? The three deputies were now staring at Karen, with expressions ranging from embarrassment to irritation. They had been dragged out early in the morning to investigate what they now realized was harassment of federal law enforcement operations. Karen began backing away from the group, her folder of evidence suddenly feeling like radioactive material in her hands. I thought, she stammered but could not complete a coherent sentence. Deputy Martinez turned to Karen with barely controlled frustration. Ma'am, you called us out here claiming this gentleman was impersonating federal agents and running illegal business operations. These are serious accusations. Karen's face was now completely white as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. I documented everything, she whispered weakly, as if her surveillance might somehow justify what she had done. Agent Rodriguez studied Karen with the calm assessment of a professional law enforcement officer, examining a potential problem. Ma'am, you have been photographing and documenting